The dust kicked up around Katherine Morgan's boots as she stood in the center of the Red Bluff, California ranch yard, her worn leather satchel gripping tight in one hand, while the foreman's words still rang in her ears like a church bell announcing her doom. It was August 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dry California landscape, turning the air into something thick enough to chew. She had traveled 3 weeks by stagecoach and wagon from Kansas City, responding to an advertisement for experienced ranch hands at the Double Creek Ranch, only to be told by Foreman Dutch Carmichael that women had no place working cattle, no matter what skills they claimed to possess. "I don't care if you can rope a steer blindfolded," Dutch had said, his weathered face set hard as granite. "This is a working ranch, not some finishing school. We need men who can handle the rough work, not some girl playing dress-up in her brother's clothes." Katherine's jaw had tightened at that, her green eyes flashing with an anger she'd learned to keep banked like coals in a winter stove. The clothes she wore had been her father's, not her brother's. She'd had no brothers, just 2 sisters who'd married well and settled into comfortable lives back east. But Katherine had inherited her father's love of horses and open spaces, and when he died last year, leaving nothing but debts and memories, she'd sold everything and headed west with dreams of making her own way. Now those dreams seemed to be crumbling like dried mud under a horse's hoof. She stood there in the yard, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, watching the ranch hands go about their business. Most ignored her, but a few cast curious glances her way. One man in particular caught her attention. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his sweat-stained hat. He was working with a fractious roan horse in the breaking pen, his movements patient and deliberate, speaking in low tones she couldn't quite hear. "You still here?" Dutch's voice came from behind her, sharp with irritation. "I told you plain as day, Miss Morgan, we got no work for you." "I heard you fine," Katherine said, not turning around. "I'm just deciding where I'm going next. Came a long way to get here." "That's your problem, not mine. Should have stayed wherever you came from. Ranching's no life for a woman. My father ran cattle for 20 years. I worked beside him since I was old enough to sit a horse." "Then you should have stayed on his ranch." "He lost it." Katherine's voice was flat, emotionless. She'd learned not to show weakness. "Bank took everything after he passed." Dutch made a non-committal sound. "Sorry for your troubles, but that don't change facts. Best you head into town, see if the hotel needs a cook or a laundress. That's more suitable work." Katherine finally turned to face him, her sun-browned face composed despite the fury burning in her chest. "I didn't come all this way to wash someone else's linens, Mr. Carmichael, but I can see I'm not wanted here. I'll be moving on." She picked up her satchel and started walking toward the gate, her pride the only thing keeping her spine straight. The town of Red Bluff was 5 miles back down the dusty road, and she had maybe $20 left to her name. Enough for a few nights' lodging and some meals while she figured out her next move. Maybe there was another ranch nearby that would give her a chance. Maybe she'd have to swallow her pride and take that laundress position after all. "Hold on there." The voice was deep and carried an easy authority that made Katherine stop despite herself. She turned to see the tall cowboy from the breaking pen striding toward her, dust coating his leather chaps, and his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Fletcher Whitmore," he said, extending a hand. "I'm the head wrangler here." Katherine hesitated, then shook his hand. His grip was firm, but not crushing, his palm calloused from years of rope work. "Katherine Morgan, though I suppose it doesn't matter much since I'm leaving. I heard what Dutch told you." Fletcher glanced back toward the foreman, who was watching them with a deep frown. "And I heard what you told him about working cattle." "Every word true," Katherine said. "Not that it matters to him." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Up close, she could see he was probably in his mid-20s, maybe 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judging. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow and another along his jawline, both faded white against his tanned skin. "You any good with horses?" he asked finally. "Good enough, better with cattle, but I can handle horses well as most men." "Can you break a green horse without breaking its spirit?" Katherine considered the question. Most men she'd known approached breaking horses like a battle to be won, using force and intimidation. Her father had taught her different. Takes patience, but it's worth doing right. Something shifted in Fletcher's expression, a slight easing around his eyes. The Double Creek belongs to Charles Harrington. He's back east right now, dealing with family business. Won't be back for another month at least. Dutch runs things while he's gone, but I've got authority over the horse operation. We've got 24 green horses that need breaking and training, and I'm short-handed. If you're willing to prove yourself, I'll give you a trial. 1 week. You do good work, you stay on. You don't, you move along. Fair enough? Behind him, Dutch was already stalking over, his face red. Fletcher, what in blazes do you think you're doing? Hiring a hand for the horse barn, Fletcher said calmly. Like you told me I could do last week when I said I needed help. I meant a man, and you damn well know it. You said I could hire who I needed. You run the cattle operation. Dutch, I run the horses. That was the agreement when Mr. Harrington left. The two men stared at each other, tension crackling in the hot air. Katherine held her breath, waiting to see who would back down. She'd seen plenty of power struggles between men, and they rarely ended well for bystanders, especially female bystanders. Finally, Dutch spat in the dust. Fine, but when she fails, and she will, you're the one who has to tell her to leave, and you're paying her wages out of your own pocket until she proves she's worth keeping. I'm not wasting ranch money on this fool notion. Done, Fletcher said without hesitation. Dutch stomped off, muttering under his breath. Fletcher turned back to Katherine with a slight smile. Congratulations, Miss Morgan. You just got yourself hired. Wages are $30 a month plus room and board. You'll bunk in the small cabin behind the horse barn. It's not much, but it's private and clean. We eat breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 7. You'll work the horses from sunup to sundown, 6 days a week. Sundays you get off unless there's an emergency. Questions? Katherine's mind was reeling. $30 a month was decent wages, more than she'd expected. And a private cabin meant she wouldn't have to share the bunkhouse with the men, which would have been awkward at best and dangerous at worst. Why are you doing this? Fletcher's expression turned serious. Because I watched you while Dutch was talking to you. You didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't try to charm your way into staying. You just accepted it and prepared to move on. That tells me you've got backbone. And because I watched your eyes when you looked at that roan I was working, you weren't seeing a problem to solve or a challenge to conquer. You were seeing a frightened animal that needed patience and understanding. That tells me you might actually know what you're doing, but mostly because my mother ran a ranch by herself for 5 years after my father died, and she was twice the rancher most men ever dream of being. So I don't hold much with the idea that women can't do this work. They just need someone willing to give them a chance. Something warm unfurled in Katherine's chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. I won't let you down, Mr. Whitmore. Call me Fletcher, and I'll call you Katherine, if that's all right. We'll be working close together, and formality just gets in the way. He picked up her satchel before she could protest. Come on, I'll show you to your cabin and introduce you to the horses. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. The cabin was small but sturdy, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone fireplace and a single window that looked out toward the mountains. Inside was a narrow bed with a corn husk mattress, a small table with 1 chair, a trunk for storage, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. It smelled of cedar and dust and years of disuse. Haven't had anyone living here for a while, Fletcher said, setting her satchel on the bed. Last man who used it moved on about 6 months ago. I'll have one of the boys bring you fresh linens and firewood. There's a pump out back for water, and the privy is behind that stand of cottonwoods. Not fancy, but it's yours. It's perfect, Katherine said honestly. After weeks on the road, sleeping in boarding houses and once under a wagon when money got tight, this cabin felt like a palace. Thank you, Fletcher. He nodded and stepped back outside, waiting while she looked around her new home. When she joined him, he led her to the horse barn, a long structure with stalls on both sides and a wide center aisle. The smell of hay and horses and leather filled her nose, familiar and comforting. We've got 32 horses total, Fletcher explained as they walked down the aisle. These 10 here are fully broke and trained. We use them for general work around the ranch. These 8 are partially trained, still need some finishing work. And these 14 are completely green. Never been ridden, most of them barely halter broke. That's where you'll start. Katherine stopped at one stall, looking in at a young bay mare with a white star on her forehead. The horse backed into the corner, ears pinned, eyes rolling white. She's terrified. They brought her in 2 weeks ago with a group they rounded up from the hills. Wild-born, probably 3 years old. Haven't been able to get close to her without her trying to kick the stall apart. Without thinking, Katherine opened the stall door and stepped inside. Behind her, she heard Fletcher's quick intake of breath, but he didn't try to stop her. She moved slowly, keeping her body turned slightly to the side, making herself small and unthreatening. She didn't look directly at the mare, just kept her in peripheral vision. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice low and steady. "Nobody's going to hurt you. You're safe here." The mare snorted and stamped, but didn't charge. Katherine took one step closer, then stopped. Waited. The mare's ears flicked forward, then back, torn between fear and curiosity. Katherine took another small step, still talking in that same calm voice, words less important than tone. It took 15 minutes, but finally the mare stretched her neck out, nostrils flaring as she took in Katherine's scent. Katherine slowly extended her hand, palm down, letting the horse investigate. When the mare's soft nose touched her fingers, Katherine felt a surge of triumph. "Good girl," she whispered. "Good, brave girl." She backed out of the stall carefully, closing the door with a soft click. When she turned, Fletcher was leaning against the opposite stall, watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My father. He always said fear made sense, and you had to respect it. Push too hard, and you'd break something inside the horse that could never be fixed. Your father was a wise man." "He was." Katherine looked back at the mare, who was now standing in the middle of the stall, watching them with alert but calmer eyes. "How many of these green horses are like her? Truly wild, not just unhandled?" "About half. The rest were born on ranches but never got proper training. Different challenges, same amount of work." Katherine felt excitement building, despite her exhaustion. This was real work, important work, the kind that made a difference. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning. For now, get settled in, get some food in you. Supper's in about an hour. Come up to the main house when you hear the bell." Fletcher started to walk away, then paused. "Katherine, that thing you did just now, with the mare, that's exactly the kind of skill I need. Dutch was wrong. You've got every right to be here." After he left, Katherine stood in the barn for a long moment, breathing in the horse-scented air and feeling something shift inside her. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she might actually have a future. The path forward was uncertain, and she knew Dutch would make things difficult. But Fletcher had given her a chance. She intended to make the most of it. Supper that night was an awkward affair. The main house had a large dining room, where the ranch hands ate together, seated at 2 long tables. Katherine found herself the object of many stares, some curious, some hostile, most just confused. Fletcher sat at the head of one table and gestured for her to take the seat beside him. She did, keeping her head high despite the uncomfortable attention. The food was simple but plentiful. Beef stew with potatoes and carrots, fresh baked bread, and strong coffee. Katherine ate steadily, listening to the conversations flowing around her without trying to join in. Most of the talk was about ranch business, which horses needed shoeing, which sections of fence needed repair, where they'd move the cattle next. Dutch sat at the other table, pointedly ignoring her existence. A few of the younger hands kept glancing her way, but when Fletcher caught them staring, they quickly found somewhere else to look. "Don't mind them," Fletcher said quietly. "They'll get used to you being here. And if they don't, then that's their problem, not yours. You do your job well, you'll earn their respect eventually, and if you don't, you'll be gone anyway, so it won't matter." Katherine appreciated the honesty. Fair enough. After supper, she walked back to her cabin in the gathering dusk. The air had cooled slightly with the setting sun, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. She lit the oil lamp Fletcher had left on her table, its warm glow pushing back the shadows. Someone had indeed brought fresh linens and firewood while she was at supper, and had even left a bucket of clean water by the door. She made up the bed, unpacked her few belongings, and then sat in the single chair, staring out the window at the darkening sky. Tomorrow would be her first real test. She needed to prove to Fletcher that his faith in her wasn't misplaced, and she needed to prove to herself that she could actually build a new life here. Sleep came easier than expected, her body exhausted from weeks of travel and emotional turmoil. She dreamed of horses running free across golden hills, and of dark eyes that saw past the surface to something deeper underneath. The next morning began before dawn. Katherine woke to the sound of the breakfast bell and dressed quickly in her work clothes, sturdy canvas pants, a plain cotton shirt, and her father's old vest. She pulled her dark blonde hair back in a tight braid and jammed her hat on her head before heading to the main house. Breakfast was oatmeal, bacon, and more coffee. She ate quickly, aware of time passing. The other hands were already filing out, heading to their various assignments. Fletcher caught her eye and nodded toward the door. "Ready?" he asked when she joined him outside. "As I'll ever be." They walked to the horse barn together, the morning air crisp and clean. Fletcher explained the routine as they went. "I'll work with you for the first few days, show you my methods and learn yours. After that, you'll take half the green horses and I'll take the other half. We'll compare progress and help each other with the difficult ones." "You trust me that much already?" Fletcher glanced at her. "I trusted you enough to hire you, didn't I? Besides, I saw what you did with that bay mare yesterday. You've got good instincts. I just want to make sure we're working toward the same goals." They spent the morning in the round pen, a circular corral about 50 feet across with solid walls. Fletcher brought out a young chestnut gelding, skittish but not panicked. He demonstrated his approach, establishing leadership through body language and positioning, asking the horse to move in circles, changing direction, looking for signs of submission and trust. Katherine watched carefully, noting the subtleties of his movements, the way he read the horse's ears and tail and eyes. His method was similar to what her father had taught her, but with small differences that made sense. When the gelding finally turned to face him and walked over willingly, lowering his head in trust, Fletcher rewarded him with gentle strokes and soft words. "Your turn," he said, leading the gelding out and bringing in a gray mare. Katherine stepped into the center of the pen, feeling Fletcher's eyes on her. She took a breath, centered herself, and began. The mare was more nervous than the gelding had been, taking longer to respond to Katherine's cues. But she was patient, persistent, never forcing, but never giving up. After 40 minutes, the mare was circling calmly, responding to Katherine's body language, and finally approaching her with cautious trust. "Well done," Fletcher said when she led the mare out. There was approval in his voice that made her stand a little straighter. "You've got a lighter touch than I do. Some of these horses might respond better to you." They worked through the morning, Fletcher bringing out different horses, letting Katherine work with each one while he observed and occasionally offered suggestions. By the time the dinner bell rang, Katherine was sweating through her shirt and her arms ached, but she felt more alive than she had in months. Over the next week, she fell into the rhythm of ranch life. Wake before dawn, quick breakfast, work with the horses until dinner, brief rest during the hottest part of the afternoon, more work until supper, then collapse into bed and do it all again the next day. It was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but it was exactly what she needed. Fletcher was a patient teacher and a fair supervisor. He praised her when she did well and corrected her mistakes without making her feel incompetent. More importantly, he treated her exactly the same as he would treat any ranch hand. No special considerations for her being female, no condescension or inappropriate attention. Well, almost the same. Katherine started noticing small things. The way Fletcher always made sure she had enough water during the hot afternoon hours. How he'd casually position himself between her and any of the other hands who seemed too interested in her presence. The way his eyes would linger on her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, an expression in them that made her heart beat faster. She told herself she was imagining things. Fletcher was just being a good boss, looking after his employee. The attraction she felt toward him was natural enough given the circumstances, but it didn't mean anything. She couldn't afford complications, not when she was still on trial, still proving herself. But the feelings kept growing anyway. It was on the 6th day of her trial period that everything changed. She was working alone in the round pen with the bay mare that had been so frightened that first day. The mare had made remarkable progress over the week, and today Katherine planned to get a saddle on her for the first time. The mare accepted the saddle blanket easily enough, but when Katherine lifted the saddle, the horse spooked. It happened fast. One moment, Katherine was carefully positioning the saddle. The next, she was on the ground, with the wind knocked out of her lungs and the mare rearing above her, hooves flashing. She rolled instinctively, years of working around horses saving her from those deadly hooves. But she wasn't quite fast enough. One hoof clipped her shoulder, sending a spike of pain through her body. She kept rolling until she hit the fence, then scrambled through the rails to safety. The mare bolted to the far side of the pen, trembling and snorting. Katherine sat in the dust outside the pen, holding her shoulder and trying to catch her breath. "Katherine!" Fletcher was running from the barn, his face pale. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her like he wanted to touch, but wasn't sure where. "Are you hurt? Did she get you?" "Shoulder," Katherine managed. "Not bad, just clipped me." "Let me see." His voice was tight with worry. She started to protest, then saw the genuine fear in his eyes and relented. Fletcher carefully helped her out of her vest and eased her shirt sleeve down enough to see her shoulder. A dark bruise was already forming, and there was a small cut where the hoof had caught her, but nothing seemed broken. "You need to see a doctor," Fletcher said. "I need to finish with that mare." "Like hell you do. You're hurt." Katherine pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pain that lanced through her shoulder. "If I don't get back in that pen right now, that horse will learn she can scare me off. She'll be twice as hard to work with after this. I don't care about the horse right now. I care about you." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Fletcher seemed to realize what he'd said, his eyes widening slightly. But he didn't take it back. Katherine's heart was pounding, and not just from the fall. "Fletcher, I know," he said quietly. "I know this complicates things. But I can't help how I feel, Katherine. These past 6 days, working with you, watching you gentle those horses with such patience and skill, seeing your determination and courage. I've never met anyone like you. You're my boss. I know that too." He stood, offering her his hand. "And I won't do anything to make you uncomfortable or compromise your position here. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest." Katherine took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, his hand still holding hers, both of them breathing harder than the situation warranted. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell leather and horse and something underneath that was purely him. "I feel it too," she admitted. "Whatever this is between us, I feel it too." Relief washed across Fletcher's face. "Then we'll figure it out, together. But first, you're seeing the doctor about that shoulder, and that's not negotiable." She smiled despite the pain. "Yes, sir." The ride into Red Bluff took an hour, Fletcher driving the wagon himself, rather than sending her with one of the other hands. They didn't talk much, but Katherine was aware of his presence beside her with every fiber of her being. Something had shifted between them, some invisible line crossed, and there was no going back now. The doctor, an older man named Samuel Peters, examined her shoulder and pronounced it badly bruised, but not seriously damaged. He cleaned the cut, applied a salve that smelled awful but felt soothing, and wrapped her shoulder with clean bandages. "You'll be sore for a few days," he told her. "Try not to use that arm too much, and if you start seeing signs of infection, come back immediately." Fletcher paid the doctor before Katherine could protest, then helped her back into the wagon. On the ride back to the ranch, he finally spoke. "You scared 10 years off my life when I saw you on the ground with that mare rearing over you. I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. That's not what I meant." He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. "I meant that in that moment, all I could think was that I might lose you, and I realized how much you've come to mean to me in just 6 days. It's crazy, I know. Too fast, too soon. But there it is." Katherine watched his profile, this man who had given her a chance when no one else would, who saw her as an equal instead of a problem to be solved. "My father used to say that some horses just know their rider from the first moment, that there's a connection that can't be explained, only accepted. Maybe people are like that too." Fletcher turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Maybe they are. When they got back to the ranch, Dutch was waiting in the yard, his expression thunderous. "Heard there was an accident." "Nothing serious," Fletcher said, helping Katherine down from the wagon. "She'll be fine in a few days." "That's 6 days she's been here, and already there's trouble. This is exactly what I was talking about. She's a distraction and a liability." Fletcher's expression hardened. "That horse could have spooked on anyone. You know that." "Maybe so, but the fact remains, her trial period is over tomorrow, and I don't see any reason to keep her on permanent." The horse operation is my responsibility, Fletcher said, his voice dangerously quiet. And I say she stays. She's the best hand I've had in 2 years, and you know we need the help. I know you're thinking with something other than your head, Dutch shot back. Everyone's seen the way you look at her. You're making a mistake, Fletcher, and when Mr. Harrington gets back, he's going to hear about it. Then he'll hear about it from me directly. Katherine stays. That's final. Dutch spat in the dust. On your head be it. He stalked off, leaving Fletcher and Katherine standing in the yard. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly. I don't want to cause trouble between you and Dutch. Dutch has been against this from the start. This isn't your fault. Fletcher walked her to her cabin, his hand light on her back. Get some rest. Take tomorrow off. Let that shoulder heal. Fletcher, I can work. I just need to be careful. Take tomorrow off, he repeated, but his tone was gentle. That's an order from your boss. Besides, it's Sunday. You're entitled to a day of rest. She wanted to argue, but the pain in her shoulder was starting to make itself known more insistently. All right, but Monday I'm back in the round pen. Monday, he agreed. He hesitated, then reached out and carefully tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. I'm glad you're all right, Katherine. Truly. Then he was gone, striding back toward the main house, leaving her standing at her cabin door, with her heart racing and her mind spinning. Sunday passed slowly. Katherine tried to rest, but she wasn't used to idleness. She cleaned her cabin, mended some tears in her clothes, wrote a letter to her sisters back east, telling them she'd found work. She carefully didn't mention falling for her boss after less than a week. They'd think she'd lost her mind. And maybe she had. Fletcher came by in the afternoon with a plate of food from dinner, since she'd missed the meal. They sat on the small bench outside her cabin, eating and talking. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about his mother's strength and determination, about coming to California 5 years ago, looking for new opportunities. She told him about her father, about the sisters she loved but never quite understood, about the loneliness of watching the family ranch slip away piece by piece. Do you miss it? Fletcher asked. Kansas? Sometimes, but mostly I miss what it represented. Home, security, knowing where I belonged. She looked out at the mountains in the distance. I'm trying to build that again here. You belong here, Fletcher said quietly. On this ranch, working with the horses. You belong here, Katherine. Their eyes met, and Katherine felt the pull between them like a physical thing. She wanted to kiss him, wanted to feel his arms around her, wanted things she had no business wanting from her employer. But the timing was wrong, the situation complicated. As if reading her thoughts, Fletcher stood. I should go, let you rest. Fletcher, thank you for everything. He smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something that made her heart ache. No thanks needed. I'll see you Monday morning. Monday came with a return to routine, though Katherine's shoulder was still sore, and she had to favor it when working. The bay mare, surprisingly, seemed calmer after the incident, as if she understood that she'd done something wrong and was trying to make amends. By the end of the day, Katherine had successfully saddled her and walked her around the round pen. The days began to blur together in the best possible way. Katherine's skill with the horses became undeniable, even to the hands who'd been skeptical of her at first. She had a gift for reading the animals, for knowing when to push and when to give them space, for building trust instead of demanding submission. And through it all, her feelings for Fletcher deepened. They tried to keep things professional during working hours, but it was impossible to hide the connection between them. The way they moved together when working with a difficult horse, anticipating each other's actions without needing to speak. The lingering glances and accidental touches that felt anything but accidental. The conversations that stretched long into the evening after the other hands had gone to bed. 3 weeks after she'd arrived at the ranch, Fletcher invited her to ride out and check on a small herd of horses grazing in the hills. They left early in the morning, packing a lunch, ostensibly to make sure the horses were healthy and accounted for. But Katherine suspected it was more about having time alone together, away from Dutch's disapproving glare and the other hand's curious eyes. The ride took them up into the foothills, following a narrow trail through scrub oak and manzanita. The August heat was fierce, but a slight breeze made it bearable. They found the horses in a small valley, grazing peacefully near a spring-fed creek. Fletcher dismounted and helped Katherine down, his hands lingering on her waist. They checked the horses, counting heads and looking for any signs of injury or illness. Everything looked good, They ate their lunch sitting by the creek, boots off, feet cooling in the water. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Fletcher said, looking around at the valley. "Peaceful, away from everything." "I can see why." Katherine watched a hawk circling overhead. "It's beautiful." "Katherine, I need to talk to you about something." Something in his tone made her turn to look at him. He was staring down at the water, his expression serious. "When Mr. Harrington comes back next week, I'm going to talk to him about making you a permanent part of the horse operation. Not just a hand, but a partner. Someone with equal say in how we train and manage the horses." Katherine's heart skipped. "Fletcher, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet. I just wanted you to know my intentions. You've proven yourself 10 times over. You're the best trainer I've ever worked with, and I want to make this official. Equal partners in the horse operation." "What about Dutch? He'll never agree to that." "Dutch doesn't have authority over the horses. That's my domain, and Mr. Harrington respects that. As long as I can show we're doing good work and making the operation profitable, he'll support my decisions." Katherine felt overwhelmed. This was more than she'd dared to hope for when she'd first arrived, dusty and desperate. "Why are you doing this?" Fletcher finally looked at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because you deserve it, because you've earned it, and because I'm hoping that if you're my partner in the horse operation, maybe eventually you'll want to be my partner in other ways too." "Fletcher, I know I'm getting ahead of myself," he said quickly. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I can't help how I feel, Katherine. I wake up thinking about you, go to sleep thinking about you. When I'm working, I'm aware of where you are every moment. And when you smile at me, it feels like the sun breaking through clouds." Katherine's eyes stung with unexpected tears. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty. "I feel the same way. I tried not to, tried to keep it professional, but I can't help it either." Fletcher reached out and took her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "Then, let's stop fighting it. Let's see where this goes. I know there will be talk. I know Dutch will make trouble, but I don't care. You're worth it, Katherine. Whatever complications come, you're worth it." She looked at their joined hands, at this man who saw her as an equal, who believed in her abilities, who wanted to build something with her. Making this choice meant risking everything she'd started to build here. If things went wrong between them, she'd likely have to leave. But turning away from this, from him, felt impossible. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes to all of it. Partners in the horses, and partners in whatever else we want to build together." Fletcher's smile was like sunrise. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, Katherine felt something inside her click into place, like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed. The kiss deepened, Fletcher's hand coming up to cup her face, Katherine's good arm wrapping around his neck. There was heat in it, yes, but also tenderness and promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he murmured. "Only weeks? I've been wanting it since you stood up to Dutch for me that first day." He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed her again. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, and if they rode closer together than strictly necessary, if their hands kept finding excuses to touch, neither of them cared. They were happy, and for now, that was enough. But happiness, Katherine had learned, was often fleeting in the West. Charles Harrington returned to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. He was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, with a thick gray mustache and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Fletcher and Katherine were in the round pen when he arrived, working with a particularly stubborn roan gelding. They didn't realize he was there until Dutch's voice rang out across the yard. "Mr. Harrington, sir. Good to have you back." Katherine's stomach clenched. This was it. The moment that would determine whether she had a future here or would be packing her bags by sunset. She glanced at Fletcher, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Keep working," he said quietly. "Show him what you can do." So, Katherine turned her attention back to the gelding, blocking out everything else. The horse was testing her, trying to intimidate her with threats and bluster. But she'd learned to read past the bravado to the fear underneath. She kept her movements calm and deliberate, asking for simple things, rewarding the smallest tries. 15 minutes later, the gelding was trotting calmly around the pen, responding to her voice and body language. When she asked him to stop, he did. When she approached, he stood still and let her stroke his neck. "Well, I'll be damned." Katherine turned to find Charles Harrington leaning on the fence, watching her with an expression of surprised approval. Dutch stood beside him, scowling. "That roan there has been nothing but trouble since we brought him in," Harrington continued. "Nearly kicked a hole through his stall last week. How'd you manage that?" "Patience, sir," Katherine said, walking over to the fence, "and understanding what he's afraid of." "Mr. Harrington, this is Katherine Morgan," Fletcher said, joining them. "The trainer I told you about in my letters." "Ah, yes, the woman." Harrington's eyes swept over her, assessing. "Dutch here has been telling me all about you, Miss Morgan. Says you're a distraction and a liability." Katherine lifted her chin. "With all due respect to Mr. Carmichael, the work speaks for itself. I've helped break and train 18 horses in the past 6 weeks. Fletcher can verify that." "It's true," Fletcher said. "Katherine's the best trainer I've ever worked with, which is why I'm recommending we make her an equal partner in the horse operation." Dutch made a choking sound. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious?" Fletcher said, his eyes on Harrington. "The horse operation has doubled its productivity since Katherine arrived. We're ahead of schedule on the training, and the quality of the work is better. She deserves recognition for that." Harrington was quiet for a long moment, studying both of them. Katherine held her breath, waiting. "Let me see you work with another horse," Harrington said finally. "That young paint mare in the corner stall, she's been giving everyone fits." Katherine knew the mare he meant. She'd been watching her for weeks, waiting for the right time to start working with her. The horse was small but fierce, all fire and no trust. But she thought she understood what the mare needed. Fletcher brought the paint out, and Katherine took her into the round pen. For the first 20 minutes, the mare wanted nothing to do with her, racing around the pen, kicking and bucking. Katherine let her run, let her get the fear and anger out of her system. Then, gradually, she began asking for direction changes, getting the mare to focus on her instead of her panic. It took an hour, but finally the mare stood in the center of the pen, sides heaving, watching Katherine with wary but curious eyes. Katherine approached slowly, talking softly, and the mare let her come close enough to touch her nose. When Katherine led the mare out of the pen, both of them were dripping with sweat. Harrington was nodding slowly. "That's the best handling I've seen of that mare since we got her. Dutch, you want to tell me again why this woman shouldn't be working here?" Dutch's face was red. "It's not proper, sir. A woman working alongside the men, living here on the ranch. It's asking for trouble." "What I see," Harrington said slowly, "is someone with exceptional skill doing exceptional work. Fletcher's right. We'd be fools not to recognize that. Miss Morgan, you're hired on permanent as of today. And Fletcher, we'll discuss this partnership idea in detail tomorrow, but I'm inclined to approve it." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. You won't regret this." "See that I don't." He turned to Dutch. "As for you, Dutch, I respect your concerns, but the horse operation is Fletcher's responsibility, and he's doing a damn fine job with it. I expect you to treat Miss Morgan with the same respect you'd give any valuable employee. Understood?" Dutch looked like he'd bitten into something sour, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." After Harrington left, Fletcher caught Katherine's hand and squeezed it. "I told you, you earned this." That night, there was a subtle shift in how the other ranch hands treated her. Not friendliness exactly, not yet, but acceptance. She'd proven herself in the way that mattered most to them, through skill and hard work. At supper, one of the older hands, a lean Texan named Ray, actually nodded to her and asked her opinion on a horse he was having trouble with. It felt like victory. Later, as she walked back to her cabin, Fletcher caught up with her. "Got a minute?" he asked. "For you?" "Always." They walked together past the cabin, following a path that led up a small rise behind the barn. From the top, they could see the ranch spread out below them, buildings dark against the twilight, mountains purple in the distance. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said, "about us, about what we talked about by the creek." Katherine's heart began to race. And I want to do this right. Court you properly, not sneak around like we're doing something wrong. With Harrington's approval of the partnership, we'll be working together as equals. There's no impropriety in partners who happen to be courting. Dutch won't see it that way. I don't care what Dutch sees. Katherine, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've already fallen, and I want everyone to know it. I want to walk with you in town, take you to the church social, introduce you as the woman I'm courting, if you'll have me." Katherine turned to face him fully. This man who had given her a chance, who saw her as an equal, who was offering her not just work, but a future. "I'm falling in love with you too. And yes, Fletcher Whitmore, I'll be courted by you, properly and publicly and any other way you want." He kissed her then, long and sweet, and Katherine thought she might float away with the happiness of it. The next months passed in a blur of work and joy. Fletcher and Katherine's partnership in the horse operation became official, with Katherine's name added to the operational documents and her wages increased to match Fletcher's. She proved herself again and again, not just in horse training, but in the business aspects too, showing a keen eye for which horses would bring the best prices at market. Their courtship became the talk of the ranch, but gradually even the skeptics had to admit they made a good match. They worked together seamlessly, their different strengths complementing each other. Fletcher was better with the rough stock, the horses that needed a firm hand. Katherine excelled with the nervous ones, the horses that needed patience and gentleness. Dutch remained hostile, but even he couldn't argue with results. The horse operation was the most profitable part of the ranch, and Charles Harrington made sure everyone knew it was because of Fletcher and Katherine's partnership. In November, Fletcher asked Katherine to marry him. They were in the barn late one evening, finishing up with the horses. Most of the hands had already gone to supper, but Fletcher and Katherine had stayed to check on a mare who'd seemed off her feed. The mare was fine, just tired from a hard day's training, and they were walking back down the barn aisle when Fletcher suddenly stopped. "Katherine, wait." She turned to find him pulling something from his pocket. It was a small box, worn velvet. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to the woman who saw me as an equal, not just a provider, someone who could stand beside me, not behind me." Katherine's hands were shaking as she looked at the ring, then at Fletcher's face. "I know we've only known each other a few months," he continued. "I know some people will say it's too fast, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're my partner in every way that matters. I want to build a life with you, Katherine, raise horses together, maybe raise a family. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out choked with tears. "Yes, Fletcher, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and kissed her until they were breathless. They were married in Red Bluff on a cold December morning in the small white church at the edge of town. Charles Harrington gave Katherine away since she had no family present. Most of the ranch hands attended, even Dutch, though he sat in the back with his arms crossed. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken with conviction and witnessed by the community that had slowly come to accept them. After the ceremony, there was a party at the ranch. The hands had decorated the barn with garlands of pine and wild berries. Someone had a fiddle, someone else a harmonica, and there was dancing late into the night. Katherine danced until her feet hurt, laughing as Fletcher spun her around the makeshift floor. When they finally escaped to the cabin that was now officially their home, Fletcher carried her over the threshold and set her down gently. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, testing the name. "That's going to take some getting used to," Katherine admitted. "But I like it. Not as much as I like the reality of it. You're my wife, Katherine, my partner, my equal, my love." He kissed her then, and Katherine felt the truth of his words in every touch. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just work, not just purpose, but partnership. Someone who saw her for who she truly was and loved her because of it, not despite it. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining not just of bodies, but of souls. Afterward, lying in Fletcher's arms, Katherine thought about the path that had brought her here, the loss of her father, the desperation that had driven her west, the foreman who'd said she had no place on a ranch. Every hardship had been worth it to arrive at this moment. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher murmured against her hair. "That I'm happy, truly, completely happy." "Good, because I plan to keep you that way for the next 50 years or so." Katherine laughed and kissed him again, and they fell asleep, wrapped around each other, two people who'd found home in each other's arms. The winter was mild by California standards, with occasional rain but little snow in the valley. Katherine and Fletcher settled into married life, their cabin a warm refuge at the end of long days. They continued working together with the horses, their reputation growing throughout the region. Ranchers began bringing their most difficult horses to the Double Creek, specifically to be trained by the Whitmores, as they'd become known. In February, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She told Fletcher on a Sunday morning, both of them still in bed, sunlight streaming through the window. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the ranch. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, thrilled, overwhelmed, but mostly just grateful. Grateful for you, for this life we've built, for everything. The pregnancy was challenging at first. Katherine struggled with morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and she hated having to slow down her work. But Fletcher was endlessly patient, taking on extra responsibilities so she could rest when needed. The other hands, even Dutch, showed surprising consideration, helping her with tasks that had become difficult. As her belly grew, Katherine had to modify how she worked with the horses. She couldn't do the physical training anymore, but she supervised, taught the younger hands her methods, and handled the business side of the operation. Fletcher worried constantly about her overdoing it, but Katherine was determined to stay involved right up until the birth. Their son was born in late September 1879, during a thunderstorm that shook the cabin walls. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, delivered him with Fletcher pacing anxiously outside. When Mrs. Chen finally let him in, Fletcher knelt beside the bed, where Katherine lay, exhausted but radiant, holding their red-faced, squalling infant. "A boy," Katherine said softly. "A healthy boy." Fletcher touched his son's tiny hand with one finger, awe written across his face. "He's perfect. You're perfect. What should we name him?" They'd discussed names during the pregnancy, but never settled on anything. Now, looking at her son's face, Katherine knew exactly what felt right. "James," she said, "after my father, James Fletcher Whitmore." Fletcher's eyes shone with tears. "James it is. Welcome to the world, little James." Those first weeks with a newborn were exhausting, but wonderful. James was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Katherine marveled at the tiny life they had created, this perfect blend of herself and Fletcher. The ranch hands took turns bringing gifts, a small carved horse from Ray, a knitted blanket from the cook. Even Dutch showed up with a bottle of whiskey for the father, and gruff congratulations. Charles Harrington gave them a bonus, and 2 weeks of reduced responsibilities to adjust to parenthood. Katherine had wondered if having a child would change how people saw her, would push her back into traditional female roles. But Fletcher never wavered in treating her as an equal partner. Yes, she was nursing James and couldn't work quite as many hours, but Fletcher adjusted his schedule to match, taking his turn walking the floor with a fussy baby at 3 a.m, changing diapers, doing whatever was needed. "We're partners," he said when she tried to thank him. "In everything. That includes raising our son." By the time James was 6 months old, Katherine was back to working with the horses almost full-time. Mrs. Chen's daughter, a quiet girl named Lily, came during the day to help with James, and Katherine nursed him between training sessions. It wasn't easy balancing motherhood and work, but with Fletcher's support and the surprisingly helpful ranch community, they made it work. The years that followed were good ones. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved following his parents around the ranch, patting horses with his chubby hands and laughing at everything. The horse operation continued to thrive, with Katherine and Fletcher's reputation drawing clients from all over California and even beyond. In the spring of 1881, when James was nearly 2, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in December, during the first cold snap of winter. They named her Sarah, and she had Katherine's green eyes and a personality that made itself known from day one. Where James had been an easy baby, Sarah was demanding, wanting attention, and cuddles constantly. Fletcher joked that she'd inherited her mother's determination. Dutch retired that year, moving to live with his daughter in Sacramento. His replacement, a younger man named Tom, who'd worked on the ranch for years, had no issues with Katherine's role in the operation. In fact, He often consulted her on training methods for the cattle horses he worked with. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm: work, family, the changing of seasons. Katherine sometimes thought about how close she'd come to missing all of this, how easily she could have given up that day Dutch told her she had no place on a ranch. But Fletcher had seen something in her, had given her a chance, and that chance had blossomed into everything she'd ever wanted. In 1883, Charles Harrington called Fletcher and Katherine into his office for a meeting. He was older now, moving slower, and there were rumors he was thinking about retirement. "I've been doing some thinking," he said, gesturing for them to sit, "about the future of this ranch, about what happens when I'm gone. I have no children, no family to pass it on to, and the truth is, the best part of this ranch, the part I'm most proud of, is the horse operation you two built." Katherine and Fletcher exchanged glances, unsure where this was going. "I'm proposing a partnership," Harrington continued, "not just in the horses, but in the whole ranch. I keep 51% controlling interest. You two split the remaining 49%. You'd help me run the entire operation, learn the cattle side, prepare to eventually take over completely when I'm ready to step away." Katherine's heart was pounding. This was beyond anything she'd imagined. "Mr. Harrington, that's incredibly generous." "It's good business," he corrected. "You've proven yourselves a dozen times over. Everyone in the region knows the Double Creek as the place with the best horses and the best training. That reputation is because of you. I'd be a fool not to recognize that and secure it for the ranch's future." Fletcher leaned forward. "What about the cattle operation? We don't have much experience with that side of things." "You'll learn, same way you learned everything else, by doing it and doing it well. Tom can teach you what you need to know. I'll be here to guide you for a few more years at least. But I need to know the ranch will be in good hands when I'm gone. I think you're those hands." They accepted, of course. It meant more work, more responsibility, but also more opportunity. Over the next few years, Fletcher and Katherine learned the cattle business, studying market trends, breeding programs, land management. It was challenging, but they approached it the same way they'd approach the horses, as partners with complementary skills and shared determination. Their family grew again in 1885 with the birth of another son, Thomas, named after Katherine's father's best friend. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, content to watch the world with solemn gray eyes. 3 children kept Katherine busy, but she refused to give up working entirely. Fletcher made sure she had the support she needed, hiring additional help, adjusting schedules, always treating her work as equally important as his own. In 1887, when James was 8 and already showing a gift for working with animals, Charles Harrington made the transition official. He transferred majority ownership of the ranch to Fletcher and Katherine, keeping only a small percentage and a cottage on the property where he could live out his remaining years in peace. The Double Creek Ranch was now officially the Whitmore Ranch, though they kept the old name out of respect for Harrington's legacy. Katherine's name was on the deed alongside Fletcher's, a rarity in that time and place. They were equal owners, equal partners, running one of the most successful ranches in Northern California. Not everyone was happy about it. There were still those who thought a woman had no business owning and running a ranch. But Katherine and Fletcher had long since stopped caring about such opinions. They let their work speak for itself, and their work spoke volumes. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. James grew into a talented horseman, Sarah into a spirited young woman who could outride most of the ranch hands, Thomas into a quiet boy with a head for numbers who loved managing the business side of the operation. Fletcher and Katherine watched their children grow with pride and wonder. In 1891, on their 13th wedding anniversary, Fletcher and Katherine rode out to the same valley where he'd first kissed her. It had become a tradition, stealing away once a year to this quiet place away from the ranch, just the two of them. They sat by the creek, older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines around their eyes, but still deeply in love. "Do you ever regret it?" Fletcher asked. "Taking that chance on me, on this life?" Katherine looked at him, at the man who'd seen her potential when everyone else saw only a problem. "Not for one single moment. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You treated me as an equal when the world said I should be less. You built a life with me, not for me. How could I ever regret that?" "I'm the one who should be grateful," Fletcher said. "You made me better, Katherine. You made this ranch better. You made everything better just by being who you are." She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. "We made each other better. That's what partnership means. They sat there as the sun moved across the sky, content in each other's presence, grateful for the life they'd built together. A life that had started with a foreman who said women had no place on a ranch, and a cowboy who'd made her his equal partner instead. The legacy they built together lasted well beyond their years. The Whitmore Ranch became known throughout California as a place where skill and hard work mattered more than gender, where horses were trained with patience and respect, where family and partnership were valued above all else. James eventually took over the horse operation, bringing his own innovations while honoring his parents' methods. Sarah married a neighboring rancher and combined their properties into an even larger operation. Thomas moved to San Francisco and became a successful businessman, but returned home often, never forgetting his roots. Fletcher and Katherine grew old together, still working side by side into their 60s, still finishing each other's sentences, still in love after decades of marriage. They became something of local legends, the cowboy and the woman who defied convention to build something remarkable together. When Katherine was 72, she stood in the same ranch yard where she'd first arrived over 40 years earlier. The buildings had been updated and expanded, but the bones of the place remained the same. She thought about that young woman who'd stood here, desperate and determined, being told she had no place on a ranch. She thought about Fletcher's hand reaching out to her, offering a chance, offering partnership, offering love. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, joining her. He moved slower now, his joints stiff with arthritis, but his eyes were still sharp, still full of love when he looked at her. "About beginnings," Katherine said, taking his hand. "About how one person believing in you can change everything." "I always believed in you," Fletcher said, "from that very first day." "I know, and I spent the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that belief." "You were always worthy, Katherine, always." They stood together, hand in hand, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The ranch that had once been Charles Harrington's, that had become the Whitmore Ranch, would soon belong to the next generation. But the values Katherine and Fletcher had built it on would endure: hard work, mutual respect, partnership in all things. That night, sitting on the porch of their home as the sun set over the mountains, Katherine reflected on the life they'd built. 3 children, all grown and successful in their own ways, 7 grandchildren and counting. A ranch that employed dozens of people and was known throughout the West for the quality of its horses and the integrity of its operation. A marriage that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. "We did good, didn't we?" Fletcher said, echoing her thoughts as he so often did. "We did better than good," Katherine replied. "We did something that mattered. We proved that women deserve a place on ranches, in businesses, anywhere they have the skill and determination to succeed. We built something beautiful together." Fletcher kissed her forehead. "The most beautiful thing I ever built was a life with you, Katherine Whitmore. Everything else was just details." She turned to kiss him properly, this man who had been her champion, her partner, her love for over 4 decades. "I love you, Fletcher. Thank you for seeing me when others didn't. Thank you for standing beside me when others said I should stand behind. Thank you for every day of this life we've shared. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who was smart enough to know talent when he saw it," Fletcher replied, "and for loving me even when I made mistakes. We made mistakes together and fixed them together. That's what partners do." As darkness fell over the ranch, Katherine and Fletcher sat together, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of companionship. Inside the house, they could hear their daughter Sarah helping prepare dinner, their grandchildren's laughter echoing through the rooms. The ranch hands would be finishing up the day's work, heading to their own homes or the bunkhouse. Life would go on, seasons would change, but some things would remain constant: family, partnership, love. Katherine thought about Dutch Carmichael sometimes, wondered if he'd ever realized how wrong he'd been. She hoped so, but it didn't really matter anymore. His words that day declaring that women had no place on a ranch had almost ended her story before it began. But Fletcher's actions, offering her partnership and equality, had written a different ending entirely. In the years that followed, Katherine and Fletcher remained active in the ranch operations well into their 70s, their combined experience invaluable to the younger generation taking over. They watched with pride as James revolutionized the horse training methods, incorporating new ideas while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Sarah's combined ranch operation became one of the largest in Northern California, and she ran it with the same fierce determination her mother had shown. Thomas's business acumen kept the family finances strong through economic downturns and changes in the market. On a spring morning in 1904, Katherine woke in the bed she'd shared with Fletcher for nearly 3 decades to find him watching her with a soft smile. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, as he had almost every morning since their wedding night. "Good morning, handsome," she replied, the ritual response that never failed to make him smile wider. They rose slowly, bodies stiff but spirits willing, and dressed for another day. There was a new crop of foals to check on, some visiting ranchers coming to see about buying horses, paperwork to review. The work never truly ended, but they wouldn't have wanted it any other way. After breakfast, as they walked together to the barn, Katherine paused to look around at everything they'd built. The corrals full of quality horses, the well-maintained buildings, the distant cattle grazing on green hills. But most importantly, the people, ranch hands who knew their work and did it with pride, children and grandchildren who understood the value of hard work and fair treatment, a community that had learned to judge people by their abilities rather than their gender. "We really did change things, didn't we?" she said to Fletcher. He squeezed her hand. "We did. Not just here, but everywhere people heard our story. You showed them what was possible when you give people a fair chance." "We showed them," Katherine corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you believing in me first. And I couldn't have built any of this without you beside me. We were always better together, Katherine." As they entered the barn, young James Jr., their first grandchild who'd been named for his uncle, came running up excitedly. "Grandmother, grandfather, the chestnut mare had her foal last night. Come see." They followed him to the stall, where a leggy colt stood on wobbling legs beside his mother. The mare was one of Katherine's favorites, a horse she'd trained from a frightened filly into a calm, confident mount. Now that mare had a foal of her own, continuing the cycle of life on the ranch. "He's beautiful," Katherine said, watching the colt explore his new world with wide, curious eyes. "Can I help train him when he's old enough?" James Jr. asked. "The way you trained his mother?" "Of course you can," Katherine assured him. "I'll teach you everything I know, the same way my father taught me, the same way I taught your father." The boy beamed with pride, and Katherine felt a rush of satisfaction. The methods she and Fletcher had pioneered, the partnership they'd modeled, the values they'd instilled, were being passed down through generations. Their legacy would outlive them, and that was perhaps the greatest success of all. Years continued their steady march forward. Katherine and Fletcher celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by family and friends, the ranch hosting a party that drew people from all over the state. Stories were told, toasts were made, and more than one person commented that the Whitmores had set an example for what marriage and partnership could be. As they grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibilities to their children, but they never fully retired. The ranch was in their blood, the horses their passion, and the work gave their days purpose and meaning. They could often be found in the barn or the training pens. Fletcher's hair now pure white, Katherine's movements slower, but her eyes still sharp for a horse's potential. In 1908, on a warm summer evening, Fletcher and Katherine celebrated Katherine's 76th birthday with a quiet family dinner. Their children were there, most of their grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren from Sarah's eldest daughter. The table was full of laughter and love, stories of past adventures and plans for the future. Later, as Katherine and Fletcher walked back to their house through the twilight, Katherine reflected on how different her life might have been if Dutch had succeeded in turning her away that first day. She might have ended up as a laundress in town, or returned east in defeat, or married some man who saw her as property rather than partner. Instead, she'd been given a chance by a cowboy with enough vision to see past convention and enough courage to stand up for what was right. "What would you say to that young woman?" Fletcher asked, once again reading her thoughts. "If you could go back and talk to the Katherine who stood in this yard, being told she had no place here." Katherine thought about it. "I'd tell her that it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it. I'd tell her that she's about to meet a man who will see her truly, who will stand beside her and build something beautiful with her. I'd tell her not to be afraid of taking chances, not to let other people's limitations become her own. And I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, and that strength will carry her through everything ahead." "She'd believe you," Fletcher said, because she had strength enough to keep standing even when Dutch told her to leave. She just needed someone to give her a chance to show it. They reached their porch and stood together, looking out at the ranch spread before them in the gathering darkness. Lights glowed in windows across the property, families settling in for the night, horses nickered softly in their stalls. In the distance, a coyote called, the same wild sound Katherine had heard on her first night here over 30 years ago. "I'd do it all again," Katherine said softly. "Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of doubt. I'd do it all again just to end up here, with you, with this life we built together." Fletcher pulled her close, his arms still strong despite his age. "And I'd still choose you, every single time, the woman who stood in that yard with dust on her boots and determination in her eyes. The woman who gentled wild horses and wilder hearts. The woman who became my partner in every sense of the word. I love you, Katherine Whitmore. I've loved you from the beginning, and I'll love you until the end." They stood together as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had defied convention and built something remarkable. A ranch that thrived, a family that loved, a legacy that would endure for generations, all because a foreman had said women had no place on a ranch, and a cowboy had made her his equal partner instead. And as Katherine rested her head against Fletcher's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, exactly where she'd always been meant to be. Home, not just in a physical place, but in the arms of the man who had seen her worth and given her a chance to prove it to the world. Their story became part of ranch legend, told and retold as an example of what could be achieved when you looked past prejudice to see capability, when you offered partnership instead of limitations, when you had the courage to challenge convention for what was right. Young women throughout California and beyond heard about Katherine Whitmore, the woman who'd been told she had no place on a ranch, but who'd built one of the most successful operations in the state. They drew inspiration from her story, used it as proof that they too could pursue unconventional paths if they had enough determination. And always at the heart of the story was Fletcher, the cowboy who'd had the wisdom to recognize talent when he saw it, the courage to stand up to those who said it was improper, and the love to build a true partnership that lasted a lifetime. Together, they'd changed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who came after them, showing that the old ways weren't always the best ways, and that progress came when you were willing to give people a fair chance based on their abilities rather than their appearance. As the years drew on and Katherine and Fletcher both reached their 80s, they spent more time sitting on their porch, watching the ranch continue without their daily involvement. But they were content, knowing they'd built something that would last, that their children and grandchildren understood the values they'd tried to instill: hard work, fairness, partnership, respect for all people regardless of gender or background. On a peaceful autumn afternoon in 1912, Fletcher passed away quietly in his sleep, Katherine's hand in his. He was 85, and he'd lived every day fully, loving deeply, working honestly, building something meaningful. Katherine grieved but found comfort in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and in the knowledge that their love story had been complete, that they'd had more time together than many couples ever dreamed of. She lived another 3 years, remaining sharp and active until the very end. She spent her final years teaching her great-grandchildren about horses, telling stories about their grandfather, and watching the ranch continue to thrive. When she passed in the spring of 1915, it was peacefully, surrounded by family, in the home she and Fletcher had shared for so many decades. The Whitmore Ranch continued for generations, always remembering its founders, the woman who'd been told she had no place there, and the man who'd made her his equal partner instead. Their story was carved on a plaque at the ranch entrance, a reminder to everyone who passed through that talent and determination know no gender, that partnerships built on mutual respect are the strongest kind, and that love, given freely and honestly, can change the entire course of a life. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the California hills and the horses nickered softly in their stalls, old ranch hands swore they could sometimes see two figures walking hand in hand through the twilight, still together, still partners, still in love. Their legacy alive in every generation that followed. The end.